Thank you, everybody, for being here. Happy to be with you virtually in this environment. Again, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat or do Q&A, and we will have a robust discussion at the end. So please type them as we go along. So why do I call this session Future-Proofing Your Organization? Well, I think we've all realized with everything that's gone on the last year and a half that our world is incredibly disruptive. And it is often referred to with this acronym VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I'm a big believer that when we can put language to something that feels really abstract and nebulous, it helps us understand it, it helps us process it, and it helps us work through it. And VUCA really, even prior to the pandemic, describes what our world is, right? We are living and working in this world that is extremely disruptive. And I think this past year plus has definitely shown us VUCA to the extreme. You know, there was the toilet paper shortage that we all remember so well, and playgrounds were closed and kids' lives were disrupted. And then there were wildfires that were running rampant all over the place. And if you are a parent like me, that you were trying to navigate helping your kids with subjects that you haven't touched in forever, it was really frustrating and difficult. And I don't know about you, but I felt like every second was one of those bad 90s infomercials where this dude was going to say, but wait, there's more. And then there were murder hornets. And then when we were binge watching TV because we couldn't go anywhere. And I just think this sums it up perfectly, right? 2020 was definitely written by Stephen King, directed by Quentin Tarantino. And I think all of us are going to remember this because none of us have experienced a pandemic before, plus all the other things that went with it. And then you add on top of it that there has been this huge revitalization that needs to happen, looking at biases and systemic racism and all the inequalities in our society, and people really demanding that there is change. And so there's all kinds of things that have shown up. And when you think about what we've experienced collectively, although we've all experienced it to different degrees, I think the late, great Peter Drucker put it really well when he said that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, it's to act with yesterday's logic. We can't keep showing up the way we've always shown up and expect to thrive in this type of environment. And I think we've realized that we have no idea what's coming at us, and we have to be ready to handle it. And when we think about being ready to handle it, here's the reality is that when we experience something we haven't experienced before, like the events of this past year and a half, it invokes a sense of discomfort. It's like stepping into the arena. The arena is a metaphor that is a moment or an experience where we are showing up fully, leaning into discomfort, knowing we can't control the outcome. So that could mean I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to share my idea. I'm going to share my gifts with the world. And if you think about navigating this past year and a half, we have needed everybody to contribute, to say, hey, something's wrong, or I have a concern, or to ask for help, or to share their ideas, because we need to innovate. We need to grow. The problem is that when we step into this arena, we are extremely vulnerable. And vulnerability is the emotions that we experience when we are faced with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And so you think about that, most of us were probably raised to believe that vulnerability is a weakness. Yet I invite you, not even just this past year and a half, if you think back in your life, any act of courage that you felt like you were being brave or you observed in someone else, there was probably some level of uncertainty, there was some level of risk, and there was some level of emotional exposure. And so in these VUCA extreme times, we actually need people to lean into vulnerability and discomfort, because vulnerability and courage are actually one and the same. There is no courage without vulnerability. The problem is that it is in our innate DNA of being human to avoid discomfort at all costs. So to instead of leaning into that discomfort and showing up in the arena, we do what Brene Brown calls armoring up. We put on this invisible armor to avoid looking bad, to avoid judgment, to protect ourselves, but it comes at a great cost. And our workplaces, unfortunately, have paid the price and become increasingly dehumanized. And this was even long before the pandemic. 7 out of 8 people in the American workforce work for an organization that doesn't care for them. and they go home feeling like crap. And then it has a ripple effect. They disconnect from their family. They might engage in behaviors trying to make themselves temporarily feel better. And it's not productive. And we know that when these workplaces are dehumanized, they lead to increased depression and anxiety and irritability and burnout, and it's not helpful. And I think over this past year, we saw a lot of this increase because challenging times reveal more of who we are as an individual and as an organization. And we saw some organizations rise to the occasion and become better, stronger versions of themselves. And we saw others become increasingly dehumanized. The divide has gotten bigger. And again, even prior to the pandemic, we know that these toxic workplaces were literally killing us. They accounted for the 5th leading cause of death in the United States and 8% of our healthcare spend. Think about that for a second. We talk about people need to, eat more kale and wear a device and get more sleep. And not that those things don't matter, but our workplaces were literally killing us due to stress. And so what organizations have typically done, and some very well intended, but is put in then wellness programs. Well, let's help employees be healthier. But even that in the last decade or so turned into what we call wellness or else. Pry, poke, prod, and punish. Let's make employees take some kind of assessment, take some biometric screenings, shuffle them into some kind of behavior change program, incent the heck out of them. And then we think our healthcare costs are going to go down, that they're going to be healthier. And the data actually doesn't support that. So it's a mismatched solution that actually further dehumanizes workplaces. And I bring this up because I've been hearing a lot of talk lately about we've got to tend to the emotional well-being of employees, and we've got to look at wellness and well-being. And yes, we do, but not with these dehumanized wellness or else programs, because employees hate them. Many of you are probably familiar with the Net Promoter Score, right? You've all been asked that question on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this company, this product, this service, this program? And we know that when you get high, those are your promoters, which is what you want. And then you have your detractors, and then you've got the passives in the middle. And several years ago, Willis Towers Watson looked at the average net promoter scores for all types of industries. So that's what you see over here. You have, auto dealers were the highest at 43, and you get down to only 3 for TV and internet service utilities. People aren't overly happy with them. Well, they did a study to look at how do people feel about these wellness or else programs. And no, this is not a typo, negative 52, right, in the United States, and you look globally. So these programs that, while they may be well-intended, are further dehumanizing workplaces. So rather than dealing with the stress and the toxicity that is going on in the culture, we're trying to put a Band-Aid on what's happening in the organization. And I think what we've also seen over this past year is a lot of people say, oh, I'm way more productive when I've been able to work at home and I'm working longer hours and I'm getting way more done. And we're also seeing Zoom fatigue, and we're seeing increased burnout, because someone can actually be really engaged in their work and love what they do, but they're not tending to their well-being. They're not taking a break. And that actually comes at a cost too. And so we need to have both. We need people that have purpose and meaning and engagement in their work, but we also need people to be whole, right? All areas of their well-being, career, emotional, social, financial, community. And when we have both, people are more likely to be able to be adaptable with change. So if we want people to survive these VUCA extreme environments and thrive in these environments, we need to equip them to be able to be adaptable, which means we have to not just look at the work, we have to look at the whole person. So what is the future of work going to demand of us? Yes, we know it's disruptive, but this growing demand for more human workplaces didn't just start with a pandemic. It's been going on for quite some time. Researcher and best-selling author Brené Brown is now in her 11th year of research on leadership and on culture, and looking at organizations, and asked CEOs globally all over the place, what is the future of leadership? What is this world demanding of us? Who's still going to be standing in 5 years? Like, what's essential? And overwhelmingly, the research has found that we need braver leaders and courageous cultures. So I want to unpack this a little bit. What do we mean by braver leaders and courageous cultures? Well, we already talked about courage, right? Is Everybody can step into that arena. Everybody can lean into the discomfort of vulnerability, speak up, share their idea, share a concern, ask for help, right? Show up fully, say, hey, I'm struggling today, or whatever it might be. We need people to show up as their full, authentic human self. And that takes courage to do that. And we need brave leaders to create the environments that make it safe to do so. We define leadership as maximizing our positive impact on the world by doing two things. First and foremost, we have to do our own work. We've got to do the work to be able to have those arena moments, to become our best, fully authentic selves, which takes courage to do that. And then as we do that, we need to look at how can we support those around us to break past barriers and step into their greatness. So if you think about this definition for a moment, this means that leadership is not a title or a role. I think we all know people who have the title, the role, the power, the authority, and they are in no way a leader. And we know people who don't have that formal power, authority, job description, but they are absolutely a leader. We believe that every single one of us has the opportunity to choose to show up as a leader in all areas of our life. We can be a leader in our family. We can be a leader with our friends. We can be a leader with our community, and certainly within our workplace. And so when we think about the future demanding braver leaders in courageous cultures, it really means that we need to equip everybody to show up as a leader, everybody to step into that arena, everybody to navigate the VUCA extreme waters and be adaptable. In other words, behave like a leader, regardless of our title or our role. That's what the future is demanding of us. And if you look back in over the last few years, Deloitte every year does their global human capital trends report. So they survey over 10,000 HR executives and leaders and C-suite all over the globe, really looking at what's happening with the human capital. I hate that word, but it's still looking at what's happening with your people, right? And back in 2017, they started to see this shift happen. So this is pre-pandemic, but really saying that we have to start to embrace new ways of thinking about our company, about our structure, about our talent, really looking at how are we equipping people to navigate disruption and how are we equipping people to show up as a leader. And then in 2018, we started to see this social responsibility come more into the equation where businesses are now being judged for their impact at society at large, right? And we're seeing that how not only how did businesses show up with the pandemic, but how are they showing up with the global social justice crisis that we have, and how are they showing up with the environment? And then if you look back at 2020, really started to realize that with this VUCA extreme environment, organizations needed to start to look at how do we transform this constant uncertainty into some kind of clarity and informed perspective that helps people navigate the future of work, right? Are we providing clarity for people in a structure that allows them to deal with the turbulence, if you will? And if we now look at the 2021, they're saying that work now has to be designed for well-being, that there's this inextricable link with our well-being and our work, and that they can't be separate. We can't be doing these separate wellness or else programs that are attached to employee benefits. We need to really look at the entire fabric of our operations and our organizations and essentially look at, are we equipping people to bring their best selves to work and home each day? Are we equipping them to bring their whole selves? And what does that look like? And we've seen it look a lot differently over the years. And again, pre-pandemic, if you look at all of the research done from the Great Places to Work Institute, they found back over 10 years ago, they were saying that the future of great workplaces lies in really this inextricable interconnectedness. Are we helping people fuse their personal and professional lives? And so I think as organizations are thinking about what does returning to the office look like, and we've learned it can be different and maybe not, it's not a one size fits all, then can we really look at how do we nurture and grow and support our talent and our people in a way that allows them to do this, and that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all, or we have to force something because we happen to have leases in buildings or whatever it might be. And there was a lot of when are we going to get back to normal? When are we going to get back to normal? And I think one of the things that was also brought to light over this past year was put really, really well by Sonia Renee Taylor when she said, we can't go back to normal because normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack, that we should not long to return. We are being given an opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And so I think the dehumanized stats that happened pre-pandemic, this last year has been a wake-up call of how do we rehumanize? How do we hit a reset button and really look at, you know what? Blank slate. What do we need? What's going to support our stakeholders in being effective as we move forward? And this is the opportunity when we look at braver leaders and courageous cultures and what this VUCA extreme environment demands of us. Every single one of us and every single organization needs to really look at this reset opportunity. And we can't do it in a bubble because people only support what they've helped to create. So resetting is not the executive team going off by themselves. It is including all the stakeholders of what does this need to look like, and can we co-create an environment that is more human, that allows us to fuse our personal and professional lives. The good news is that conscious capitalism for the last decade plus has really been leading the way in giving a model for what a humanized business can look like. Really looking at these four tenets of, one, is there a higher purpose? So going back to, is there clarity of who we are, what we believe, our values have been operationalized. They're not just words on a wall, but they've been translated into behaviors that people can actually use as a filter for how they show up. And we rally everything around that, that there's stakeholder orientation. We look at everybody, all of our stakeholders, as being equal, our community, our customers, our employees, and we're considering all of them in our reset. That there's conscious leadership, that we are equipping everybody, not just people who have a title, to show up as the best version of themselves, to show up with a spirit of service, to show up intentionally rather than reactively. And we're being very intentional about our culture. We're nurturing it and we're not leaving it to chance. And the good news is that just the publicly traded conscious businesses that have been embodying these four tenets over the last 15 plus years, compared to the S&P 500, they outperform them by more than a 14-to-1 ratio. And at the 10-year mark, they were outperforming them by an 8-to-1 ratio. So not focusing on the numbers, but focusing on culture and people and a different definition of leadership pays off in the long run. But it's counterintuitive. It's not business as usual. And so I give all this as foundation because what I want to do is say, okay, here's the great data. Here's why we need to do this. I want to give you a framework of what you can do to start to build a conscious, more human workplace. In other words, what you can do to start to future-proof your own organization. And this isn't rocket science, but it's tangible. And so one of the ways that we think about this is, what does a thriving, future-proofed organization actually look like? And so a few years ago, we created what we called the Thriving Organization Pyramid. You can download it for free. It's a nice visual. We designed it as a conversation starter where you can look at, where are we strong and thriving in our organization, and where do we have some gaps and some missed opportunities? And so if you think of all of the background foundation I've given you so far, and we think about that, we need to really recognize this fusion, this inextricable interconnectedness of individual well-being and the health and well-being of the organizations where we work. The base of this pyramid are all factors that are really more related to what we would call organizational well-being factors. So the design, is it very hierarchical or is it more flexible? Looking at the culture, are you intentional about it? Looking at how you define leadership, and are you nurturing leadership? Do you have clear purpose? What's the communication? What's the trust? What's the climate? And yes, we need to support people in being whole versions of themselves. But what a lot of organizations do is they want to put a Band-Aid in. They say, oh, you know what? The base of our pyramid is actually fairly weak, but we're going to plop in a wellness or else program, or we're going to plop in an employee recognition program, or, you know, we're going to do an engagement survey or do some one-off things, and they're not really tending to where there are structural issues. And so this can be a way to help you go, wow, do we have strengths and can we continue to nurture that? And where do we need to pay attention? Because all of these components are really what make up a thriving organization. And so if you think about how you can leverage this and how you can move towards this being your experience, we talk about these 5 key rehumanizing principles. And these principles, again, are really interconnected and really are essential for us as individuals as well as organizations to navigate this disruptive world and really have these future ready workplaces. And so this is what I want to go through with you today and give you some nuggets of what you can start to put into practice right now to leverage these rehumanizing principles. Rehumanizing principle number 1 is build a lighthouse. This very much aligns with the purpose over profit tenet of conscious capitalism. Think for a minute of what a lighthouse does, right? It shines this bright beacon of light. It cuts through the fog. So when there are stormy waters or when there's VUCA extreme waters, it provides a sense of calm, of focus, of direction, of where we need to go. So when your organization has done the work where you are clear about what your purpose is, and you've taken that next step to operationalize your core values, it acts like that lighthouse where even though the world is extremely disruptive, people can ground themselves and go, okay, I know what to focus on. I know how to have a filter to make decisions of, do we pivot our products and services this way? Well, is it aligned with serving our lighthouse or not? And I will tell you that for us as a business, we went back to this over and over and over to look at how did we pivot what we provide? How do we decide what new products or services we were going to offer that served our purpose of rehumanizing the workplace so people can bring their best selves to work and home each day? It helped us decide, what did we say yes to? What did we say no to? And I will tell you, on an individual level, doing this work has been a game changer, because as well, when I look at what do I take on and what boundaries do I set that allow me to show up as a leader, this lighthouse principle is super, super critical. So I want to build on this just a little bit more. Several years ago, Bill George, who was the former CEO of Medtronic, said that in order to thrive in a VUCA environment, we need to embrace the principles of what he calls VUCA 2.0, where we move from volatility to vision, right? That volatility gets calmed when we have that lighthouse that gives us that clear vision of where to go. We need to move from uncertainty to understanding, meaning we have to seek out people who are different than us and really try to understand their experiences. That we have to move from complexity to courage, and we have to move from ambiguity to adaptability. And they all become super relevant, but why is this lighthouse principle so important? And why is this such a core tenet of conscious capitalism? Well, if you look on the individual level, Imperative is an organization that has been studying purpose at work for a long, long time. And every couple of years, they put out what they call their workforce purpose index. And they look at people who have what they call a purpose mindset, really that sense that I have the power, regardless of my role each and every day, to make my work fulfilling, that I can find purpose and meaning in my work. And what they found is that fulfilled employees, not surprising, are high performers. They're the ambassadors of your brand, and you're going to be able to retain them. And we know that even in difficult markets, your most talented people always have job mobility. And if you are losing good people, that's a huge red flag. So you want your best people to be ambassadors of your brand, to stay. And there's lots and lots of benefits all across the board for that. And if we want to take this to the well-being section for a moment, since we know how interconnected individual and organizational well-being are, there's decades of longitudinal studies that show that overwhelmingly people who report a strong purpose in their life, they live longer, they have lower risk of various health conditions and diseases, they sleep better, they're more relaxed, they're less likely to be depressed. So there's well-being benefits for having that purpose as well. So if your organization has clarified its lighthouse, but you haven't supported yet your people in clarifying theirs, there's an opportunity there to really strengthen your lighthouse. And again, going beyond words on a wall and truly operationalizing your values. So for us, as an example, we have one that we call pave a path for others to thrive. So it means if we are going to say or suggest to stop doing something, we will always recommend a more effective, more human alternative instead. We're not just going to beat something down without giving another alternative. We have another one that says operate with a abundance mindset rather than scarcity, and that there's great power in community and building up others. So this has helped us look at how do we have difficult conversations that we might need to have? How do we decide what clients we might say no to and what work we take on and what we don't take on? So if your organization hasn't clarified that, where every single employee can embody it, use it as a filter, knows how they need to show up, there's an opportunity there. And if you've done that, but each individual hasn't clarified their personal core values, I will tell you, I literally have mine sitting right here, and I anchor myself in them several times a day. I have clarified the behaviors that tell me I'm in alignment with my values, and I've clarified the behaviors that tell me I'm getting out of alignment. And it allows me to check myself, especially when I'm dealing with a difficult situation or I'm trying to make a difficult decision. Such a critical piece. Earlier this year, Kevin Oakes, his firm is the Institute for Corporate Productivity, and they do lots and lots of research on workplace culture. And he said that regardless of the generational group, so this is not just a millennial thing or not just a Gen Z thing, that people want to be associated with organizations that have a strong sense of purpose. And so you're just seeing this over and over and over, that lighthouse is so critical for building that foundation, again, to provide calm in the midst of VUCA storms. The second rehumanizing principle is create fearless environments. So this is where psychological safety comes into play. Amy Edmondson has been doing this work for many decades with Harvard Business School, and I encourage you, if you have not checked out her work, to check it out. But she defines a fearless organization where interpersonal fear is minimized so that we can maximize performance on the team level and the organizational level. Psychological safety at its core means that every single individual, if I feel psychologically safe, I don't feel worried that, like, I can speak up and share my idea. I can say, hey, I think something's wrong. I can ask for help. I can speak up and give difficult feedback. And I'm not worried that I'm going to be retaliated against. I'm going to be judged. It's going to be thrown back in my face. The thing is that psychological safety actually resides at the local team level. So when you look at how can I make a difference, are you creating a psychologically safe environment in your family, in your friend group, in your neighbor group? And what does that look like? And so it's really normalizing the discomfort and making it safe that people can be vulnerable, right? Lean into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, step into the arena. Because when you don't have psychologically safe environments, you have avoidable failures and you have dangerous silence. And we've seen so many examples over the years of organizations that have had issues because people didn't speak up or they took unnecessary risks. And so each and every one of us can create that fearless environment, and it becomes easier to do if we've got that lighthouse to kind of anchor us. The third rehumanizing principle is wait in the messy middle. Look, if there was a fast forward button or a magic wand when it comes to change, I would be absolutely the first in line. But the reality is that there isn't a shortcut, there isn't a workaround, that we have to go through something, period. So if you think about everything that's happened this last year, we'd like there to be a fast forward button, there isn't. But people who took the opportunity to learn about themselves, learn about their organizations, learn about their people, be uncomfortable, figure stuff out, make mistakes, learn from them, right? That messy middle is where growth and transformation happens. If you think about if you've ever experienced grief of any kind in your life, you can't go around grief, you have to go through it. And people who shove down their feelings and don't let themselves grieve, it comes up in one way, shape, or form at some point. So we have to look at how do we make it comfortable for people to be uncomfortable and wait in that messy middle. And in particular, when we think about people showing up as a leader, this is what I mean by the messy middle. Tending to the inner game of leadership. The inner game of leadership is our emotional intelligence, our internal beliefs, the stories we tell ourselves, our assumptions, our meaning-making system. It's all of that like icky stuff that we don't want to deal with, right? It's the stuff that has us feel vulnerable. The outer game of leadership is the manifestation of that. It's our knowledge, it's our skills, it's our competencies, capabilities, behaviors. And both of these are really important. When we say leadership is a behavior, it is. That said, guess what? Our inner game runs our outer game. And too often when we think about our people development strategy or the things that we look to for ourselves, we go right to the outer game because it's visible and it's a little more comfortable, right? I can shore up some skills. I can build some new knowledge. but we skip over the inner game because it's uncomfortable, it's messy, and it takes a while. The reality is that the process of developing extraordinary leadership is the same process as becoming an extraordinary human being. And when we help people tend to that inner game, it also helps their well-being. But it helps them look at, where is my self-limiting narrative that has me armor up rather than show up courageously, right? Where does my thinking get in my way? This is also part of conscious leadership. And so we need to really look at both, but waiting in the messy middle is all about leaning into the discomfort to strengthen that inner game so that we can then have a well-honed outer game. And so what we know from research on adaptive leadership is that if we don't help people learn new ways by changing that inner game, their attitudes, their values, and behaviors, people can't make the leaps necessary to thrive in this VUCA environment. And so when you think about waiting in the messy middle, it could be, what are you taking time to pause and reflect every day and look at what went well for me today? And what did I learn about myself today? Where was there a missed opportunity? Not to judge ourselves, but to learn. Every screw up we have, every misstep we have is an opportunity to learn. Or where am I noticing that I get really triggered? Or where do I notice that I start to be judgmental instead of curious? Self-awareness assessments. There's all kinds of work that we can do to start to look at ourselves, right? Become our best, fully authentic selves. And every single one of us can start doing that today, right? And it's an ongoing journey. It's not a check the box and move on. And as an organization, are you really creating those fearless environments so people can wait in the messy middle? Because if I don't feel safe doing it, I'm not going to. So if you're asking teams to embark upon inner game work, but you don't have a safe environment to do so, you got some work that you have to do before you can ask people to wait in the messy middle. And then that brings us to rehumanizing principle number 4, show up as a leader. As we've already said, leadership is an opportunity for us all, right? It's not limited by our title or our role. And it's really hard to show up as a leader in our life if I haven't done the work to wait in the messy middle, if I haven't strengthened that inner game and honed my outer game. And it's really hard for me to show up as a leader if I don't have a fearless environment where I feel safe in doing so. And it's a lot easier to show up as a leader if I have clarity of purpose and values to ground me, both as an individual and on an organizational level. And so when we think about showing up as a leader, really this is conscious leadership kind of 101, or that tenet is, at its core, can I recognize when my ego is taking over? Ego is that filter that we have, that voice that we have that has us want to please people, has us wanting to perform, has us wanting to be perfect, and has us wanting to armor up or self-protect, right? And we all kind of know that ego. We all have it. And so what we need to recognize is, when does our ego want to take over and avoid judgment and avoid looking bad, and instead build the muscle to pause and go to self-reflection? Like, gosh, I wonder why I'm feeling triggered here, or I wonder why I'm judgmental here, or I wonder what that other person's experience is like, or I wonder how I could add value here. And we need to stop believing everything we think, that just because we have a thought doesn't mean that it's accurate. And really embedding a reflective practice of some sort, whether you journal, whether you just do reflective questions at the dinner table, whether you do it on a team level. I'm a big believer of, using those questions of what went well today, what do I appreciate today, where was there a misstep, what did I learn from it? We use that at the dinner table. We use it in our teams, right? So in team meetings, like, hey, what went well this past week, or what went well yesterday? So starting to build in reflective practices to get people off that autopilot, get people off of ego, so they can show up intentionally. And again, we can all start doing this today. You can start asking that question of yourself. You can start asking that question of your colleague, of your team member, of your kid, of your spouse. And the reality is that in these VUCA extreme environments where we have so much that's out of control, we are challenged to change ourselves. And so if every single one of us starts to do some of this work to show up as a leader, just imagine how more human, more effective, not just our workplaces would be, but really our communities and our world could be. And then that gets us to the final rehumanizing principle, which is find your tribe. And I want to clarify why we use this language, because tribalism by itself is not a great thing, right? Finding people who are like you and, sticking with like-minded groups and, putting walls around you, et cetera. But if you go back to the origins of the word tribe, it's really people who have your back. And so when we were thinking about what to label this, Find Your Tribe is really the understanding of the VUCA 2.0 acronym. It is intentionally seeking out people who are different than you and literally sitting to understand, what is it like to be you? What is your experience like? This is where listening skills come into play, or listening sessions come into play. It is building community, because guess what? Culture is not the responsibility of the C-suite. Culture is not the responsibility of the HR department. Culture is everybody's responsibility. And it's not done in a bubble. We always say this isn't a solo journey. So Find Your Tribe is seeking out people who are different than you to understand them. And it's about building community, because change happens. If you think about grassroots organizing, it happens with growing momentum in masses. And so when you start to build relationships with other people, you build momentum and you look at what's possible and what could we do. And so start seeking out people who are different than you. Seek out people in your organization or your neighborhood who you don't know very well, and get to know them as a human being, and start to engage in dialogue about what could our workplace look like if everybody could bring their whole self to work, their whole self back into their personal lives. What would that look like? So Find Your Tribe is something we all can do. Again, today, go seek out somebody who you don't know well. Go seek out someone who's different than you, and literally sit in a place of curiosity and understanding, and start to build community and start to strengthen your relationships. One more research study for you. This was one of the largest leadership research studies on over 35,000 leaders, and looking at what is today's workforce looking for, and I would say future workforce, looking for more meaning, human connectedness, and really this desire to contribute positively to the world. So even if your workforce has gone predominantly virtual, even if it's going to stay virtual, there are ways that we can look at truly nurturing authentic human connection. And again, I think it starts with you seeking out somebody and taking a genuine interest in them, not, oh, I got to check the box. So we all can start to really create this more human experience by building those relationships. So to sum it all up, one of the things that I'm really encouraged about is that we've seen this over the last year and a half. We've seen some incredible organizations just rise to the occasion and do incredible things, and they've grown in spite of the challenging times as a result. And so we know that rehumanizing workplaces and our communities actually can be done. And guess what? It does not have to start at the C-suite, because culture ultimately lives and resides at the local team level, which means that every single one of you has an opportunity to create that positive impact around you on your team and grow from there. And in fact, we talk about this in our book, but we've actually helped workplaces transform their culture one team at a time, not unlike grassroots organizing. It doesn't have to be a top-down. It helps if the C-suite's on board, but it's not a deal breaker, because stuff falls apart at the local team level anyway, if there's not that strength of culture. And so if we think one person can't make a change or can't make a difference, I would invite you to think differently. Or if you have this thought of, who am I to do that? Who are you not to? Because we can't sit back anymore and wait for someone else, quote unquote, more qualified to fix the problem or bring forward an idea. We need everybody to embody these principles and to create more humanity, and to really have a spot where we all can thrive. Everyone's included. Everyone feels like they belong, and everyone can bring their best selves to work. So with that, I think we've got plenty of time to have some dialogue, have some discussion. There's my contact info if you want to reach out to me. So I think I'm going to actually stop sharing, and then we can look at questions.
Hi, Rosie. I've got the first question came up during the presentation.
Yeah.
I've worked in the toxic workplaces in the past. One of the problems you face is not knowing who to go to with concerns or solutions out of fear of retaliation. People comment that HR is the solution, but I'm reminded that HR works for the employer. What do you suggest as a way to have your voice heard while not being blacklisted or worse, let go?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because depending on the toxicity, here's what I will tell you is that I feel your pain, and I think why I'm so passionate about this is I've lived through a toxic work environment twice, and I will tell you that the second one that I lived through, I think there was a change in ownership, and where speaking up used to be embraced, it was now a liability, and I was kind of getting pushed out the door. I share that because where in theory, HR should be your ally and you should be able to go to them. I will just say that I was in an experience where I knew darn well HR wasn't my ally, and there was actually no point because they were kind of part of all of this. And so for me, I had to really look at, was there an opportunity where I actually felt I could make a difference here? Or was it too far gone and I needed to go? We have a section in our book called Should I Stay or Should I Go? And so I think that if there's pockets of the organization that are good, or you could try with HR, because I think we always do need to bring something forward, and HR can't do anything about it. That's their job. They're supposed to be confidential. Yes, they work for the organization, but they're about mitigating risk. And so if there's stuff that's going on that could potentially open them up for a future lawsuit, like HR needs to know about that. And so I think if you haven't tried anything and you don't feel safe going to your boss, then I would at least start and try with HR, depending on what it is that's going on, particularly if there's anything where it's like, harassment or anything that might even get into like a legal or ethical realm. I would for sure go to HR. And if it's just one of those organizations that it's broad spread and it's a sucky place to be, then you might want to look at how do you survive right now? Like what boundaries you need to put around yourself, what bubble do you have to put yourself in while you look for something else. And unfortunately, sometimes that's the reality too. But I would say start with HR if you have not gone there yet. And you're the only one who kind of knows, is there an opportunity in this workplace or not? But usually retaliation is not tolerated, especially if you look at like, do they have a code of conduct and whatnot that could also kind of be your ally. And if you got retaliated against for bringing something forward, then that's where there's a potential for seeking out legal counsel too.
Thank you. We had a comment during your answer of how do you start this change on your team, and I believe you answered that pretty well. I just want to give you the opportunity in case there was anything additional there.
Oh, how to start change on your team?
How to start that change. And it sounds like you not only answered the question, but also went through in depth. It sounds like you answered that question while you were going, right?
Well, kind of. I mean, I think I did. Like, you mean throughout the presentation? Yeah, I think the way that I look at how do you start change on any team is we always have to start with who we're being, right? And so how I show up, if you think about kind of like the pay it forward, or if you think about the people that, there's people you like to be around and they just like, they have an energy that you gravitate towards. And there's people that their energy is just like sucks the life out of you. And so I always look at, can I be that person that brings the energy that people want to be around? First and foremost, that's what I can control. So first of all, who are you being? And then secondly, it could be, hey, why don't we try this reflective practice? Or, hey, why don't we do this? So you could even just kind of try some of this stuff, or like I said, seek out somebody different on your team. So there's ways we can start to have that ripple effect that I think we underestimate.
Thank you. Here's another question I heard you answer in the first one. Have you written a book? If not, you should.
Yeah, two. So if you look, so here's my shameless plug. Our first book came out over 5 years ago. It's called How to Build a Thriving Culture at Work. And then our latest book came out last year, right at the start of the pandemic, Rehumanizing the Workplace. I think there was a slide with our book cover. So yeah, Rehumanizing the Workplace, we actually go in depth in these 5 rehumanizing principles. It's also organized by that Thriving Organization Pyramid. Improving actually happens to be one of the organizations that we feature in the book. So yeah, go get it. That would be awesome.
Thank you. Here's another one. Dr. Ward, what recommendations might you have for building a psychologically safe team in the midst of an unpleasant but not yet toxic environment?
So that's a great question. And I saw in the chat someone had mentioned Google's Project Aristotle, which they did 5 years of research on effective teams, and psychological safety was the top factor of psychologically safe teams. So there's a few different ways. I mean, ultimately, psychological safety is most impacted by the formal people leader of the team. And so I think if you're the formal people leader of the team, you can start to have a dialogue with your team. If you're not, maybe you can have a dialogue with that team member and say, hey, like before stuff gets away from us, let's really look at what's going on. There is a really, really cool tool that's now available. So I guess I'll do another shameless plug. So I was part of a cohort with Amy Edmondson's company in North America getting certified. They have now her psychological safety inventory or psychological safety scan. It's 7 questions. but people on the team can take it. And you basically look at in these 4 different domains, like where are you at in terms of inclusion and belonging, willingness to help, difficult conversations, and the other one's escaping me at the moment. But then you facilitate a discussion, or a discussion gets facilitated with your team, that basically it's about creating a safe space to bring forward the things that maybe are the elephants in the room that haven't been brought forward to start the journey of building psychological safety. So that would be like a formal way you could do it, and happy to talk to you about that. But otherwise, I would say, if you're the people leader, I would start looking at, can you facilitate that type of discussion with or without the inventory itself? And if you're not the people leader, do you feel safe having the conversation with the people leader of, hey, I feel like there's an opportunity here for us to just start having this dialogue. And so I think a lot of times, if the formal people leader explicitly makes it safe to say, hey, we know there's been some challenges on this team, we need to start having a dialogue and bringing stuff forward, this is a safe space to do it, and that's reinforced over and over, you can actually start to build psychological safety fairly quickly.
Thank you. And related, how would you help address the challenges to inner game growth when interacting with team members that are burnt out? How do you help recreate the desire to grow?
So I deal with this, I think, on a day in, day out basis. I think a lot of burnout, there's multiple things that go with burnout. And some is certainly environmental, right? Like the work hours and the pace and whatnot. And so one of the things that I usually talk to on a daily basis, honestly, with leaders and physicians that I coach, is talking about kind of what's contributing to their burnout. And I start asking them questions about, like, where are they setting boundaries, or where do they feel like they can't set healthy boundaries? Because a lot of times there's an inner narrative around, like, I can't say no, or people aren't going to like me, or, so sometimes we talk about very practical things like, can you go to every meeting on your calendar, and if it's an hour-long meeting, make it 45 minutes instead, and if it's a half-hour meeting, make it 25, and start building buffer time in for yourself. So there's some tactical things, but a lot of times the burnout is our own narrative of feeling like I have to be on, feeling like I have to keep checking my email, feeling like I can't set healthy boundaries. And so sometimes just having that dialogue around, if you're feeling burnout, like where are your boundaries right now, and kind of where are you feeling pulled out of alignment? And sometimes that can open up an opportunity to realize, wow, like I'm doing some of this to myself, or some of it is I'm not speaking up because I have a discomfort with speaking up, or I don't want to rock the boat. And so anyway, I think just having a dialogue about what is it like to be you, and what has you, like, what do you think the biggest thing is about your feeling burned out, and where are there conversations you're not having that you could be having, or where are there boundaries that you're not setting that you could be setting, those types of things. So I think those would be places that I start usually, and most people are like, oh yeah, they realize that they're contributing to their own burnout, and that they've got to be part of the solution. It can't just be somebody else come and fix my burnout experience.
Thank you. And I got a couple related ones. They wanted to know if you'd be okay sharing the slide deck, if we can share that from yours afterwards.
Sure. Yeah.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
And then, is there a listing of the books referenced in your presentation anywhere?
Actually, I would say, well, one, they'll be in the presentation, but if you go to my personal professional website, drrosieward.com, there's a section on my website that's inspiration, and I have actually a lot of these books. It's like a book bibliography, along with podcasts that I listen to. You'll also find blogs that I write. You'll also find my podcast. But all those books, most of them, I think, should actually be on my website, and then some. A lot of the ones I didn't even mention here.
Great. All right. And thank you. And in a number of cases, existing leaders may lack the awareness that they need to change in order to allow leadership to blossom throughout the organization. How do you advise engaging existing leaders in change?
That's a great question. And I think there's multiple layers to it. So I think one of the conversations that I usually use as kind of a door opener is just kind of saying, hey, like, look at this past year. Like, what have you, where have you found that you've been effective, and where have you struggled? Because if anyone says that they don't struggle or that they're great, that's like a kind of a red flag that their ego is running the show. And so I think if you're trying to lead up, I think one, you have to have a fearless environment to be able to, like, give some feedback to a leader, or just to engage in that dialogue. If you don't have that, then that's another whole other conversation. I think if you are a people leader in the organization, you have an opportunity to have a dialogue with your fellow people leaders about, what do we want leadership to look like at this organization, and are we as equipped as we need to be? What gaps has this past year plus really shown us of where we need to shore up some of our skills, or where we need to be different. I think if you have engagement survey results, or you do culture surveys or anything, that might also, you can maybe use that data to say, hey, there's an opportunity here. So I think you need to look at where's their opportunity to not shame or judge people, but to use existing feedback sources or data to say there's an opportunity where we can be better.
And next we've got, are you aware of the National Psychological Health and Safety Standard of the Mental Health Commission of Canada? And there's a link to it as well.
I am not, but I will definitely check it out.
All right, that's all I'm seeing for the questions here.
So, great.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else from your end?
No, I just say thank you. Thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for the great, thoughtful questions. I love it when people make my brain work. And yeah, I'll definitely will get the present slides out to you, and hopefully you find value in the various resources in there. And I just anytime that there's an opportunity for me to inspire any little nugget where you can go be a conduit of positive change, I'm a happy camper. So thank you for being with me today.